The Winds of Winter has yet to be released, and may never be released. But we sure can hope and cope, as that's pretty much what the fan has been doing for the past 14 years. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for diving headfirst into the breadcrumbs that George R.R. Martin has graciously tossed our way these last 14 years. Because yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're taking a close look at the Winds of Winter sample chapters. More specifically, the Theon I sample chapter. And by the end of this video, I'll be letting you, dear viewer, know whether this chapter is worth your time, or if you're better off skimming the summary on the A Song of Ice and Fire wiki. Let's-a go! Now, if you're wondering what I mean by sample chapters, well, these are by no means leaks or fanfiction, but rather real legitimate chapters written by George R.R. Martin himself that are meant to take place within the Winds of Winter. They haven't been edited or finalized for publication, so technically they're not officially canon, but they are the closest thing we have to a Winds of Winter book. In total, there are over 10 complete sample chapters, plus 2 partial fragments, floating around online, and they feature several familiar POV characters from the previous books, including our boy Theon Greyjoy. Interestingly, several of these chapters were originally meant to be included in the final version of A Dance with Dragons, the preceding book in the series. However, since George ran into the manuscript page limit for that book, his editors convinced him to push those chapters back to the Winds of Winter instead. Which brings us to today's chapter, Theon I. Officially made public on George's website on December 28, 2011, Theon I picks us up right where we left off in A Dance with Dragons by throwing us back into the snow-covered Crofters village, where Stannis Baratheon, the one true king, is temporarily camped and preparing for war. Recently dropped off by Tycho Nestris, a representative of the Iron Bank of Braavos, Theon Greyjoy finds himself a prisoner of Stannis. Stannis, who is currently strategizing on how to take down the Bolton forces holed up in Winterfell, as both sides are currently contending with a pretty brutal blizzard that just won't let up. So, the 1 million gold dragon dollar question. Is the Theon I sample chapter worth reading? My 1 million gold dragon dollar answer? Yes, absolutely. The Theon I sample chapter is one of the stronger sample chapters that George R.R. Martin has made publicly available. So much so that I actually think this might be my second favorite of the bunch. Personally, I found the wartime situation in the North to be the most compelling storyline in A Dance with Dragons, so to get any kind of follow-up to that is gravy in my book. But beyond that, this chapter delivers some sharp dialogue and some pretty strong character moments that give us a fascinating insight into both Stannis and Theon. We also get a healthy dose of political tension within this chapter, and unlike a few of the other samples, this chapter actually succeeds in moving the plot forward. So if you haven't read Theon I yet, definitely give it a go. But if you have, let's talk spoilers. So the down and dirty of this chapter is through Theon Greyjoy's POV perspective as he's chained and hanging from a wall of this frozen tower at the Crofters village. He witnesses Stannis uncover a few betrayals, most notably that of the Karstarks. Thanks to a letter Jon Snow sent to Stannis during the events of A Dance with Dragons, the one true king learns of Arnulf Karstark's treachery. And after interrogating Maester Tybalt, the Dreadfort's maester, Stannis pretty much confirms that yes, he has indeed been betrayed by the Karstarks. Maester Tybalt had sent a raven to Winterfell, essentially detailing the location of Stannis' camp at the Crofters village, and now Stannis' position may be potentially compromised as the Frey and Bolton forces are very likely to rush upon Stannis' location and try to do battle with him. However, despite this betrayal, Stannis doesn't seem to be too rattled by this. I mean, yeah, he has these numbskull Karstarks arrested, but he also seems to have a secret scheme up his sleeve that he hasn't shared with anyone else in the camp. Or at least not with Theon anyway. Now, before we get into the fun theory stuff, I will say part of what makes this sample chapter so engaging is how much time we actually spend with Stannis. Yes, we've seen him through Davos and Jon POV chapters in earlier books, but I don't quite recall another chapter where we spend so much time devoted entirely to Stannis. Spending this much time in close proximity to Stannis gives us a clearer window into how his mind works, what he values, and what he's willing to do to win this upcoming Battle of Ice. Not to mention reading him methodically sniff out the Karstark betrayal just adds another awesome layer to this amazing character that I just can't help eat up. But just as important as Stannis is the character of Theon. Fresh off of his Reek identity crisis throughout most of A Dance of Dragons, Theon has finally re-embraced his identity as Theon Greyjoy. Even though he's currently Stannis' prisoner, there's still an element of catharsis here in seeing Theon repeatedly insist that his name is Theon. I mean, no one's actually calling him Reek anymore, but it doesn't matter. He needs to say his name, and I think that's pretty cool for his character. And while Theon Greyjoy has gone through quite a character transformation since the events of A Clash of Kings, there are still flashes of his old self that pop up here and there throughout this chapter. This new version of Theon in The Winds of Winter feels like he's a more complex blend of the A Clash of Kings cocky Theon and the hardened survivor he became in A Dance of Dragons. But okay, yes, this chapter has some great character moments and we all love Stannis and Theon. But what exactly makes this sample chapter stand out above many of the others? In my opinion, anyway. Well, it's what it sets up for the remainder of The Winds of Winter. More specifically, the long-awaited Battle of Ice, because yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the Night Lamp Theory. In a nutshell, the Night Lamp Theory boils down to the following. 1. Stannis, without revealing his full intent, orders his men to cut holes in the frozen lake near the Crofters' village, supposedly for fishing. 2. The real plan. He actually intends to light a fire on the island in the center of the lake, thus creating a giant glowing beacon in the middle of this blizzard. And 3. The Frey cavalry, drawn to the light, will charge across the ice, only to plunge through the thinned-out ice, much thanks to all the holes that have been cut into it. It's a fantastic theory, and one that gained some serious traction in this chapter, especially thanks to this pivotal quote from Stannis.
"Bolton has blundered,"
the king declared.
"All he had to do was sit inside his castle whilst we starved. Instead, he has sent some portion of his strength forth to give us battle. His knights will be horsed, ours must fight afoot. His men will be well nourished, ours go into battle with empty bellies. It makes no matter. Sir Stupid, Lord Too Fat, the bastard, let them come. We hold the ground, and that I mean to turn to our advantage."
If this theory were to come true, not only would it create a brilliant, brutal set piece to kick off the Winds of Winter, but it would also give readers a proper taste of the military cunning that George R.R. Martin has long attributed to Stannis. And then there's Stannis' final words to Justin Massey, one of the knights under his fiery banner. Before sending Massey off to hire sellsword companies across the Narrow Sea, Stannis gives him a chilling command that should word reach him that the king is dead, Justin is to avenge that death by seating Shireen Baratheon, Stannis' grayscale-afflicted daughter, on the Iron Throne. Now, at first glance, this may all just read like Stannis preparing for the worst. But given how deliberate Stannis is in his phrasing here, and how secretive he's been up to this point, it almost reads like a contingency plan for faking his own death. A move that would allow Stannis to disappear into the chaos and catch the Boltons off guard. It's subtle, but it plants just enough doubt to make us wonder if the Manus has more up his sleeve than we realize. As far as Theon goes, and whether or not Stannis will ultimately sacrifice him in an effort to cement an alliance with the Northern Mountain Men, I think the Battle of Ice proper will actually begin before Stannis can even make a move on poor old Theon. Why do I think that? Well, for one, Theon is just too interesting of a character that I can't help but wonder that George might want to do something more with him further down the line. And two, we have the Asha Fragment. Oh boy. So, some context. Back in June 2014, during a segment featuring George R.R. Martin on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, some keen-eyed and, let's be honest, unhinged fans managed to pause and enhance a shot of George's computer screen. And what they uncovered was a blurry, low-res draft snippet of a The Winds of Winter chapter featuring Asha Greyjoy as the POV. Since then, that snippet has been dubbed the Asha Fragment. Now, because this fragment was never officially released to the public, it's likely more prone to rewrites than the 10 official sample chapters that George has formally shared over the years. Regardless, from this tiny snippet, fans have pieced together a few key details that may hint as to what's to come. Most notably, the Frey forces have officially arrived at Stannis' camp bearing the severed head of Mor's Crowfoot Umber, RIP, and with the chilling line, they rush together like, it seems like the long-awaited Battle of Ice has officially begun. With the battle suddenly underway, the urgency of sacrificing Theon in front of a weirwood tree suddenly feels far less pressing. So given all this, I do think that at least in this first portion of the Winds of Winter, Theon will survive. But that brings me to my final discussion point. How much of this publicly available Theon 1 sample chapter do I think will stay intact when the Winds of Winter is, hopefully, one day published? Truthfully, pretty intact, I think. This sample chapter takes place immediately after the events of A Dance with Dragons, and was actually even originally written to be part of that book. So this, in combination with the fact that this was the very first sample chapter released by George R.R. Martin, tells me that Theon 1 is very likely to be either the first or second chapter of the Winds of Winter, following the prologue, of course. Meaning that because this chapter is so close to the end of A Dance with Dragons, George already has a strong published foundation to build from with this chapter, to the point that I don't think Theon 1 will see any major rewrites, beyond some light edits to polish the prose or tighten up the grammar. As far as the Asha Fragment goes, and the events surrounding the Battle of Ice, that's a different story. Since that chapter was never officially released, it's likely that George has reworked that one quite a bit since 2014. But until we're finally holding the Winds of Winter on our hands, we won't exactly know how the battle unfolds or what fate ultimately awaits Stannis, Theon, and Asha. But that, my friends, is the Theon 1 sample chapter. A worthwhile, character-driven read packed with some intriguing clues for what may lie ahead in the Battle of Ice. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy. Consider hitting that join button down below if you'd like to support me even more. Next time, we'll be diving into the Aryon 1 sample chapter. Until then, the Advocate, out.